I am Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary. I thank you for joining us for another conversation in our series of conversations on being church at the time in the time of COVID-19. This afternoon, I am privileged to have join me Dr. Sandra Montes, who is the interim director of worship at Union Theological Seminary, as well as the Episcopal Church Foundation's language resource consultant. Sandra, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you. I would say yes to anything with you.
Well, I don't know, but I thank you for saying yes to this.
Thank you.
I want to begin this conversation by asking you, what does it mean to be church in this time of COVID-19?
For me, to be church during this time is to be present. I think that is one of the biggest things that I've noticed. Just to be, I think is really what it means to be church in these times.
So in that sense, it's really living into, in one sense of the word, what it means, particularly within the Christian faith tradition, to be embodied and to be an incarnate reality. And so in spite of the fact that we are unable to gather together and worship, which I'll come back to in a minute, but there are still ways in which we can be that embodied presence at this time.
Yes, I think that is so important for us. I think that a lot of us, like I love social media and technology. So I've been, doing evangelism and praising God, et cetera, throughout my life on social media and through video and things like that. And so for me, this is just an extension of that to be able to be in people's homes and without necessarily going somewhere, but just staying put and just sharing our life through a screen.
So, Sandra, let me follow up on that a little bit.
Yeah.
You are within the Episcopal Church denomination, one of our liturgical gurus. We call upon you in our general conventions and other gatherings to bring liturgy alive for us in these gatherings. You are currently serving, as I said, as the interim director of worship at Union Theological Seminary, and again, playing that role of bringing liturgy alive. Mostly every faith tradition and denomination has some kind of liturgical practice that is related to worship and gathering together. Well, now we can't. And of course, there's no denomination that is more defined by its liturgy than, say, the Episcopal Church. Many people have talked about what we're losing at this time of crisis in terms of liturgy. What I like to focus on is what we're gaining. What do you see that we're gaining as we have not been able to come together and worship? What are the lessons learned?
I think we're gaining more people to come that may not necessarily go into one of our churches, because we see people, pastors in their homes. We see pastors without their collars on or with their collars on, coming on as from their kitchens, from their tables, with a candle, without one, just being very raw and very real, very, to me at least, very Jesus and very God to everyone. I think that is what we're gaining. I also have noticed that some people who have, love high church, just all the bells and whistles and all that stuff, have come to really share that home is also church. Home is also sacred. Home is also high church, because it just is, home is church. And I think that is really cool to see, deans and, people with high degrees, et cetera, coming to us wherever we're at. It's very moving and very touching.
Now,
And
was
so
that your
I love
subtle
that.
critique of me, deans and people with a lot of degrees?
That is relevant, but you're doing the same thing. Look, we can see what's behind you, and that is, I think, and you're coming to people's homes also. I think
Yeah,
that's one of the things we're gaining.
there is something very sort of theological about that, right? That the context itself becomes revelatory.
Right.
And so what are we learning from these very ordinary everyday contexts in which people really try to find ways to worship God? The other thing that it does is it unmasks those of us who are behind the collars, right? We're just human beings like everybody else, somehow trying to reflect the glimpse of God. And
Right.
even as it sort of unmasks the theologies, right, of liturgy. I tuned in yesterday to a particular worship service. It was not Episcopalian, and it was a Black church UCC service, and they were having Eucharist, and the pastors said for the people in their homes, get together with your family, right, and let's share the bread together. And so something very real about that.
Yeah.
So what is it that we're learning about our liturgical practices it, while we aren't able to be in church? What are we discovering? What new perspective should we have?
You know, one of the things that we're doing at the chapel, Union Theological Seminary Chapel, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We have a bunch of different kinds of chapels happening. We have a song going on. We can have something live, just one person speaking to people. We have Zoom going live like now, this. We have several people today. We had the Black Caucus sharing just thoughts and song. And there were a lot of us there together. And I think that's something we're learning, that it can be done no matter where you're at. Church can be anywhere. It can also be very creative. We know that, at Union very well, that it can be just very creative. Just any kind of ritual can happen and worship can take place. And I think that a lot of us are learning that from home now. And some of us who, like me, I'm like, oh, I'm so low church and all this stuff. There's some things that I know that I'm going to really be excited about if we ever get to do things, in a church building, the same, quote unquote, the same way. There's some things that I can't wait to do, but that we can do at home as well. Like you said, I mean, just with my family, with my son, I can just break bread. I can turn on a candle, like in morning prayer that EDS at Union has. They always bring a candle in, and that just kind of, just brings in us into a different space. A lot of us people of color, I should maybe say a lot of us Latinos and Latinx, Latinas, we have altars at home. So we've done this, for a long, long time. And so for us, we already have an altar at home. And now I think a lot of us are understanding how important that is, because now we don't go to a church to have an altar, but we have our altar here. And I think that's also something that we're learning, that, how can we make our space into this space that we feel is holy.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I didn't want to cut you off at all. But how we define sacred space, right?
Yes.
And who defines that space as sacred, and how we
Yeah.
make that space sacred. And we perhaps don't have to rely on hierarchies,
Yes.
throwing around incense or holy water to make a space sacred, even as I say that as one who's a part of a tradition that does that, and I respect that.
Right.
But it helps us to understand truly the significance of what perhaps Jesus says, where two or three are gathered,
Right.
in a new way. Which also, though, leads me to ask another question. There are many people who do not have access to internet. I know I was speaking with a student who works in a parish, and it's a poor parish, and that parish doesn't have the ability, one, to do services online and to live stream. Secondly, many of the people in that parish don't have the ability to go online and live stream. So we've talked about how COVID has revealed the endemic injustices and inequality in this country. We even see that in terms of our worship, ability to worship beyond. It seems to me that becomes an indictment in so many ways on the church and what it means to be church, and how we've the things we have neglected in being church. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I've seen one of our in the Episcopal churches, very low social economic, etc. Places is Navajo land, and I know
Right.
that they have a bunch of people who aren't right now that are sick.
That's right.
And the pastors, what I've seen them doing is actually going, from home to home. And of course, they can't go inside or anything like that, but they'll leave things outside of people's doors to have church together. So they will have things that, that people can actually look at if they do have, Wi-Fi, etc. But they also have stuff that they can do from just, paper or, like from a bag, etc. I think that pastors, at least I hope that pastors have people's phone numbers and snail mail addresses, and that they're doing something about that, calling or sending a note or something. I think that is on us, on the leadership.
Right.
That's a lot of times we forget because we have email addresses, we have email or social media, and then email newsletters, etc. We cannot forget the people who are completely out of reach, but that is on our pastors. And I think that small churches, of course, do that pretty well because there's a smaller number. But I think sometimes our larger churches that may be able to partner with these smaller ones, I wonder how is that happening, because I see partnerships between big churches and big institutions.
Right.
But I don't often see a partnership of, what, we're this big church, this is how we're going to help this smaller or less affluent place. And I think that may be something that we can also look at and think about, how is it that we're going to go forward? Because everybody keeps saying that, right? Everybody keeps saying, okay, this is a new normal and things like that. But I think it's more like, okay, what are we going to take from now and really put it together as a body of Christ?
No, I agree. How can we, through this crisis, become better?
Right.
And not focusing so much on what the bad that's going to come or how bad it can get, but instead focusing on how much better we can become afterwards. And
Right.
I think you've raised a good point here that afterwards, as we move through this crisis, we need to begin to look at ways in which, say, our endowed parishes can support, instead of supporting themselves, that our endowed parishes can support those parishes and communities that have already been considered expendable because of the way we've treated them or neglected them. But now we have to make sure that they don't become dispensable. And those communities aren't disposable and dispensable peoples. And I'm so glad that you drew our attention to Navajo land, because we know that this crisis is having an inordinate impact upon Navajo land, particularly on Native American communities. And it's been pointed out that the inordinate impact upon the Navajo. And so I thank you for pointing that out, but it reminds us again about what it really means to be church, which goes far beyond the liturgy that we can practice within four walls. It's sort of the liturgy we can practice by being an embodied presence.
Yes.
But I want to ask you, I know you have thoughts on this. With all of that said, there are churches, Sandra, that continue to gather, like the church in Florida, for example, or I guess it's Florida or Louisiana as well. And under the premise that they follow the commands of God, not the commands of the state. Can you speak to that?
I'll try to be a little nice, and it is Holy Week after all. To me, one of the things, we've talked about this with my parents a lot too, because like churches that do the snake handling and things like that. In the Bible, it doesn't tell you, hey, look for snakes and do this. It says, if this happens, then this, I'm still going to save you. If you walk through deep waters, I will save you. If you go through the fire, I will save you. It doesn't say, hey, look for the fire. Hey, look for that deep, and just jump in and, and I will do, my magic trick. It doesn't say that. Now, I believe in miracles. I believe in God's power. I believe in all that. And I also believe doctors, and I also believe, the laws, and I also respect them. And I think that that is the most important thing. It's not, sometimes it's like, oh, well, Jesus is going to save me. Well, what about if you get infected and nothing happens to you, but you touch someone else and they truly become very ill and then infect other people, et cetera? I mean, we've been told that this is a very contagious thing. Jesus, yes, Jesus is there with all of us, and also tells us, be smart, you know, and why are you trying, I don't understand, why are we testing God with this? I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Sort of testing God as we think of the temptations that begin us on our Lenten journey, and I wonder, about our ethical responsibility. What is our responsibility as church? What is our responsibility in caring for God's people and God's creation? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, and I also see like televangelists selling things right now and telling people do this or do that. I think, our responsibility when people follow us is to point people to God and to Jesus as Christians. And that is, about love. When I love you, I'm not going to do anything to put you in jeopardy. When I love you and I love myself and I love God, I'm not going to do anything that's going to harm you or me. And I think that is the responsibility that we have to take seriously as leaders. People look up to us, to show them what it is to do. And this may be very unpopular, and I apologize in advance for those who are still doing this, but I also feel people who continue to go to their churches, pastors, especially in the Episcopal Church, because that's what I see. What kind of message are we sending? What kind of message are we sending, that only at, the building there's God and power? I mean, we can do the same thing from our homes. And I just think that, I wish people would think about that. Yes, we have beautiful buildings. Yes, maybe it's only 5 or 10 people in there, but are we being responsible? Are we saying to our people, no, you should come here, this is the place to be, when the laws say stay at home, do not go out? I mean, I just, I'm conflicted about those things. And because I don't know, but so anyway, so I think that is our responsibility, to point people to Jesus and to show love. And right now, love, as our nurses and doctors are telling us, love is staying home. That's what love is right now.
Yeah, and it sounds as well like you're preaching a message, Sandra, an Easter message, really. Because if the resurrection means anything, yes, it means that God ultimately overcomes and triumphs over a culture of death, whatever that death may be. Injustice is right. Death, right? These crucifying realities of culture. But it also means that we are called into life, not into death.
Right.
And so many people are bemoaning that they can't celebrate Easter. What does it mean at this time to celebrate Easter and to be called into a culture of life and to say no, that death has no power? Seems to me that the Easter message at this time is even more powerful, right? Because it is a message that takes place in and of itself in the contradictions of life and the contradictions of death. Speak to that. How can we celebrate Easter? And
as a Latina and as a Native American, I've had to deal with death my whole life, right? I mean, they tried to kill us and I'm still here. As African descent, same thing, right? I mean, they tried to just make us disappear and we're still here. We are people of the resurrection. That is what we do every single day. As we wake up, it's like, okay, I'm alive. I need to take this breath. And so I think all of us can celebrate that Jesus is alive. We can celebrate that at home. Just it's a knowledge inside. Easter is my favorite holiday. And, I love to prepare. I love to buy new hats. I love to buy new clothes. I love to buy, the Easter basket for my kids, all that stuff. And so this year I kept thinking, how is it that it's going to be different? And I think, Sandra, it's not going to be different because inside is the same joy. I'm still going to yell out that word that I've been trying not to say all this, all this 40 days and eat Sundays. I'm still going to wear one of my hats that I have here. I'm still going to dress up. I'm still going to, eat chocolate and all this stuff. But but it is something inside. We are children of the resurrection. Let's not forget that. We believe, those of us who are Christians believe that Jesus rose, and because of that we also will rise, whether it is right now, whether it is later. I believe that that is our hope. That's what, that's the only thing that gives me hope, that there is something more, that there is something alive, that Jesus is here with us. So when you are there, and where it says, 2 or 3, Jesus is already with you. So that's already 2 right there. And if anybody is lonely at home, because I know a lot of people are at home and alone, Jesus is with you. And just remember that. And Jesus is alive. And, those of us who are Christians, we have that hope to look up to or to look forward to. And it can just be an incredible celebration. Singing all you want to sing. Actually, you can even sing louder because, nobody's going to look at you and say, like, that's not the right note. You
could say you can't sing like me. But here's the thing that you again point us to for move to the last question, and I think it's very important. And that is, initially you talked about how these wealthier churches or endowed parishes can help the underserved and underserviced parishes and communities. These churches are living in these sort of crucifying realities, right? And now here again, you direct our attention to the fact that, there are people who have historically, cultures and groups of people who have historically lived their lives in crucifying realities. And so that every day you wake up as a person of color in this country that is so sort of saturated with white supremacist violence, whether we're talking about systemic injustice, et cetera, that every day you wake up as a person of color and go to bed as a person of color and wake up the next morning, it's like, I'll say the word, though it's Holy Week, hallelujah, the Lord is risen, right? And so that there are lessons to be learned from the communities that we have ignored about what it really means to be a follower of Jesus and to understand the reality of the resurrection. Something I think that we've taken for granted, that we don't really understand what it means to pull life out of death, like the rabbit out of the hat. Well, you don't understand that when you've always had the hat and a whole lot of rabbits. And so, right, for communities who've not had hats and had to eat the rabbit for a meal for that day, we know what it's like to be able to pull that extra one, if you will, forgive all rabbits, that rabbit out of the hat. So I think you speak a powerful message, Sandra, of what we can learn from the communities that we have ignored and that we have neglected and that we have seen as offering nothing to theologically to the meaning of resurrection as it happened out of a crucifying reality.
Amen.
So with that, what message, as you are the guru of liturgy for many of us, as a woman of color who takes seriously what that means, as the interim director of worship at Union Theological Seminary, what message do you want to leave for us all as we move through Holy Week to Easter morning, about how we worship and what it means to be church and what we should indeed be paying attention to and how we should indeed grow as we move through this crucifying reality that is the COVID pandemic?
I think, as we were talking, I kept thinking, we need to reach out. All of us have somebody in mind that we can reach out to during this Holy Week to take hope to them, and to also gain something from them.
Mhm.
I think sometimes when we see people who are in a more difficult situation than us, we may think that, you know, we can bring them hope, but they can also show us how they are dealing with this in a hopeful way. And so I think we should all try to reach out to somebody during this week that will, and to share Christ or resurrection or God, whatever, however you want to see creator and spirit, um, with love, with hope, with everything that you have. And, you know, let's take that resurrection power, let's take that hope, that miracle beyond Sunday. I think that is one thing that I want to do this Easter and this Holy Week. I want to take that further, you know, for it not to just be what it's always been, but to actually think, okay, this is truly a resurrection day. And let's bring that to other people as well.
Well, I think that's a good message for us to end on. And so let us live into the resurrection and be that resurrection light
Yeah.
for someone else. Thank you so much, Dr. Sandra Montez, for this conversation. I look forward to future conversations with you, and I invite our audience to stay tuned and to look out for our future Facebook Live conversations on what it means to be church in this time of COVID-19. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.